All right. I'm out of breath. Welcome to Farewells and Homecomings, an afternoon with Howard Goldblatt. My name is Frederick Green. I'm the chair of the Modern Languages and Literatures Department here at San Francisco State. And I am so delighted to see so many of you here today on September 28th, which of course is Lao Shijie. In the Chinese-speaking world, it's Teacher's Day. And I think this is so appropriate for this wonderful event. Yeah. And I am just so excited to welcome back to campus Professor Howard Goldblatt, a Guggenheim Fellow and the foremost translator of Chinese literature of our time. Howard has translated more than 50 Chinese language authors, not books, authors. And he told me last night that he's still translating every day. Every morning he gets up and he translates. And he is, of course, also an alum of the San Francisco State Chinese program and a former faculty member. So I want to see who in the audience is a student or a colleague of Howard's. I know we have some. Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. So yesterday, our graduate students already had the pleasure of meeting with Howard in a hands-on workshop, and that was really wonderful. It was really hard to get him out of that room. And now he's here with us. Before we get started, I just want to thank a few people. I want to thank, Associate Dean Resha Cardone, if she's here, also a professor of Spanish and a fellow translator, and of course the entire LCA Dean's team. I want to thank Aaron Ben and his team from LCA Live. I'd like to thank Nicole Lange and Ken Maeshiro from Alumni Relations. I'd like to welcome Nancy McDermott, who was the dean of the college when Howard was a faculty member here. So, yeah, let's give it up for Nancy. I also want to thank my colleagues in the Department of English, Humanities and World Literatures, Jewish Studies and Journalism, who are co-sponsoring our event tonight, and of course my dear colleagues in the Chinese program, including Mia in the back. I hope you are all holding a wonderful little brochure. Yeah, if you're not, you should raise your hand and Alec is going to bring you one. This brochure was designed by my wife, Miwa. She didn't want me to tell you that, but I thought I have to point this out. And if you go to the very last page, you will see a big thank you to our event sponsor, the Argonaut Hotel. This is the second time the Argonaut is sponsoring an event of the Chinese program. And again, without the Argonaut, we couldn't have pulled it off. So I really want to thank Stefan Müller and Tony Rumpf. I don't know, Tony, is Tony here? He said he might come if he has the time. I asked them if they wanted to co-sponsor, and they just said, of course, it's a pleasure. And then Tony told me his mom and his wife are both San Francisco State grads, and it's a family matter to support public education. So big round of applause to them. Okay. But now, Howard is busy on his phone.
I'm turning it off. I'm turning it off. I'm not on the phone.
So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming back to campus Professor Howard Goldblatt.
Thank you.
Okay, what I forgot to tell you is that Howard, a while ago, contacted us, because he had some things that he wanted to to send us. He wanted to send, and he sent me a pile of photographs, wonderful photographs, and some really nice books. And then he wanted to send something else, and that was so precious that I said, Howard, I know that if you send that thing, it's going to fall off a FedEx truck somewhere between Boulder and San Francisco, and it'll be lost. You've got to come here in person and deliver it. So we'll save that until the very end. But what I did want to say is that some of those photos were so precious that I said, you know, Howard, you got to talk us through these photos. So I picked a few, and he picked a few, and we're going to go with that. So Howard, first thing I'd like to ask you, how did that journey of yours into the realm of Chinese language and literature start? How did it all begin? And I know that it technically didn't start at San Francisco State, right?
No.
Can you see the image?
I can. Yeah. You want me to go?
I want you to.
Let me preface my remarks by saying I'm just delighted to be here. I'm so grateful to Fred, I'll call him Fred, for giving me a chance to come back after almost 40 years, believe it or not. And it's a new campus to me, but it still feels like home. So I'm happy to be here, so happy to see you, some old friends, some new friends, and now on with the answer to that question. My background is different from most of the people in the field, I think. I was born before America got into World War II, if you can believe that. I lived my youth through the war, got a paper route, started giving people the paper. We didn't have a whole lot at home, but we had enough. My father worked in the shipyards in Long Beach, building ships for the war. I don't remember what he did exactly after the war ended, but he stayed home. And so that's the way I kind of started out. And I went to school, and I was a decent student, but disruptive. The teachers all thought that I had ADHD before I even knew what that meant. But I liked it. And so I went through school in Long Beach, a nice school, I guess, and progressed on to high school, and then something happened, and I realized I don't like school. I went to a really tough school, tough high school, Polytechnic High School. It was rough, and I hated it. I absolutely hated it. And so I got through 4 years of that somehow, and when I got out, the first time I asked a question that would repeat later several times, now what? So I said, I'm going to get a job. I told my dad, I'm going to go out and get some work. He said, no, you're not. What are you going to do? I said, what am I going to do? He said, he's going to college. I said, why would I go to college? He says, because I told you to go to college. And so I said, okay. So I applied to all the colleges that I thought would take me, and they all said no. They wouldn't take me. And so I went to a community college in Long Beach and spent a year there. It was okay. And then managed to get into Long Beach State College, at the time, college, in its 10th year of existence. So it was a brand new school.
And it's a CSU, of course. It's a California State University.
It is now.
Yeah.
Okay. At the time, it was Long Beach State College. We had bungalows and trailers there. It was, and I wasted the next 4 years. I learned nothing. I got out with a useless degree, and I turned to my dad when I got out, and I said, now what? He said, oh, now what? Let's see. You're 18 or whatever I was. He said, there's a draft board that just sent a message to us. You're going to be drafted into the Army to go to Vietnam. And I said, I'd rather not do that. And he was able to find a way for me to get into Naval Officer Candidate School. We're a Navy town. So after all of that, I jumped on an airplane for the first time in my life and flew to the East Coast. Spent the next 6 months learning how to do Navy stuff and expected to be sent to a ship someplace. Well, I was surprised. They didn't send me to a ship. They sent me to a place everyone likes to go to, and that was Taipei, Taiwan. And I said, where is that? And they told me where it was, and I went to the first foreign country I'd ever been to. And I wasted the next 15 months not doing a whole lot there, but kind of liking what I was seeing. But again, I was working on watches, 8 on, 8 off, 8. So I never really did much. And when I finished that year and a half, I did go to sea, and I went aboard a ship and spent the next couple of years aboard a ship sailing around there, out of Japan, into Hong Kong, into Saigon. I liked it. Being at sea was nice. I liked being on the ocean. It was hard work, but my favorite political candidate always says, hard work is good work. And so I think we were doing good. The ship came in, time to me to get out, and I asked the same question again, now what? I had no clue what I was going to do from that moment on. I ran into an old teacher at Long Beach State, and he said, well, you speak Chinese, don't you? I said, kind of. And he said, well, maybe I should just back up a bit. When I was, that's right. And I am moving aside. When I got out of the Navy, when I got the ship get in, the Navy said to me, we want to keep you around a while. And I said, why? He said, because Vietnam's getting hot. We need you people to go. So I said, well, I had no choice. Where would you like to go? We'll give you a choice. I said, I like Taipei, Taiwan. Why don't I go back there? They said, you're off. I went there, got a promotion. And while I was there, I decided to hire a tutor to learn a few things that say in Chinese. And it was as if someone turned on the light. I fell deeply in love with something for the first time in my life. I said, this language is really cool. I liked it a lot. So I spent the next 2 years with a tutor. When I got out of the Navy in Taiwan, I went immediately to the the Mandarin Training Center in Taiwan, the Shida, the Guoyu Zhaozhe Zhongxin. And I spent the next year concentrating on Chinese. I did nothing but Chinese. I went out on the street and made people laugh when I was 9月1毛, 3七21, all of that. I was doing that all day long. I was having a great time. Their eyes were rolling. They were laughing at me. But I loved it. I couldn't have been happier. And then my father died. Now what? So I went back, and then I ran into that teacher from Long Beach State, and he said, you speak Chinese a little bit? And he said, why don't you go to graduate school? I said, why would I do that? He said, because you can't do anything else. And I said, okay. And I applied to all the programs that offered graduate programs in Chinese. They all rejected me, except one, this one.
So you drove up, right? You drove up in your VW camper van?
That's the picture of me in my hippie uniform and my VW bus. And so KY...
And you came, and you were interviewed by this fellow, right? You got to remind us.
When I came here, I was interviewed by him, by KY Xu. The other teachers, Maurice Deng, Liu Chen. Liu Chen, by the way, was the son of the teacher of the emperor. He was the emperor teacher's son. So he had pretty good stories to tell. And KY Xu, I had an interview with him, and he tested me. He wanted to see how much I knew.
So let's just hold on one second. For the people who don't know who KY Xu is,
okay.
yeah? Just one second.
I will tell them. In just a moment, When I start, I don't stop. And I went in, and he interviewed me. I had heard about him before. And the only person I knew about was KY Xu, Xu Jieyu. And I'd heard that he had done some remarkable things at a university that I now find myself going into. So when it came time for him as the professor in comparative literature and Chinese, a remarkable man who came to America in the Chinese army. His son is here, so correct me if I'm getting it all wrong, but he came here in the army.
Yeah, let's give a round to Roland.
Roland. And at some point, he began teaching Chinese at Defense Language Institute, I believe, and got out of the army, went to Stanford University, got a PhD, and was hired by somebody at San Francisco State to start a program. And he did with 2 other faculty members, Liu Chen and Maurice Deng. And so now here he was sitting in an office, and I went in and I was very nervous, as I should be now. And he grilled me a lot, and he found out I really didn't know much. He said, we can work with you. We can teach you a lot. And so over the next 2 years, while I was at San Francisco State in the Chinese program as a brand new graduate student, I took courses from everyone, but I really liked my courses with KY Shi. It was more in my wheelhouse, as they say in the Navy. And it was time for me to get moving because I was 30 years old. I was a first-year graduate student, and I was 30. And he began working with me to help me get over the hump, learning things about literature, but more importantly, learning things about life. He was an incredible model. And so I took 2 years of courses there. I did a little teaching assistant work. He actually even got my first piece of writing in Chinese published while I was a student in Taiwan, 中央日报. You don't get any better than that, right? If you're interested, years later, I also got a piece published in the other one, 人民日报. So 两个党报我都发表过. And so, but he said to me, he said, Howard, you have to move on. And I said, I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to go on. He said, we can't do anything with you here. And so KY Shi, Professor Shi, I never called him anything but Professor Shi, or Shi Sena. I went to a program in Indiana under a professor I'd always wanted to study under, Liu Wuji, and spent the next 2 years taking classes there, doing my French, doing my Japanese. I got a Fulbright, went to Japan to write my dissertation, finished that, passed that. What was the question I asked myself? Now what? I made application, and can you believe it? San Francisco State had an opening. They invited me back to talk. We talked. I was hired. And so in 1974, I began my career as an assistant professor at San Francisco State.
And you became essentially a colleague of these fine people, right? So
Maurice Zhang, KY Shi, me, Carol Zhou, I think, and Liu Chen. That was the program. There was another one who taught Japanese and Chinese, Edith Yang, who is still, by the way, in her 99th or 100th year, doing well. We expect to talk on the phone soon.
And then this is a photo of you, I guess, when you were here. You told me yesterday this is when you got your first office, right? When office space was scarce at San Francisco State.
After I had been here a while, I went to the dean, Nancy McDermott, who was such a major help to me. In fact, even helped me start the first and only journal in modern Chinese literature in English. It's still in existence. I edited 10 volumes, 10 years. Thanks to Nancy, Dean McDermott. And I got an invitation to go to UCLA to teach for a year as a visiting professor. So I went to Nancy and I said, I'd like to do this. What do you think? She said, only one promise. And I'm not going to put words in your mouth, Nancy, but one promise, you'll come back. And I said, they're not going to want me. Of course I'll be back. But I have a request too. We were sharing offices with 3 other faculty members and it was just jammed. And it was hard to do much. So I said, perhaps I could get a better office, maybe not so many people. And she found me an office by myself in another building, small office, but I loved it. I got a book written there. Everything was fine. I said, this is the life. She took it back the next year. And so I went back to the humanities building and was given an office with one other faculty member, Japanese faculty member, with whom I became very friendly. And there's where I stayed. After he left, one of my favorite colleagues of all time, Christine Yao Shuhua, and I shared this office for those years until finally the day came when, no, shall I stop here?
Yeah, but you said...
I have trouble doing that.
One thing I want to say, you said you started that journal, MCLC, and you said it's still around. It is the flagship journal in the field of modern Chinese language and literature. And it was started at San Francisco State, just to get that on the record. And it was started by Howard. Howard, you did talk about your dissertation a little bit. And I know that your dissertation work then carried over into your research really here at San Francisco State, and also your early translation work.
Yes.
And oops, we got this photo, we skipped this photo, and it is, of course, the author Xiao Hong.
I think she may be the only author I've translated I never met. And I'm sorry about that, but it happens. When I was at San Francisco State taking my first course in modern Chinese literature, another professor by the name of Yang, Henry Yang, he once mentioned that there were some writers in the Dongbai, in the northeastern province, who all kind of knew each other and they were writing fiction. And they sounded very interesting. So I went over to the J. Paul Leonard Library to find one by a book by one of the writers, Xiao Jun, who really interested me. There weren't any about him, but there was another book by someone else that was named Xiao, I thought at the time, Xiao Hong. So I took it and I said, I'll try this one. Wow, it was such a good novel. I said, this is what I want. I didn't read it easily because I hadn't done a lot of reading, but I said, this is one of the best things I've ever read in my life. It was a book by Xiao Hong, a fiction about her childhood. And so at that moment, I pretty much made my decision that I wanted to do more work with Xiao Hong. And so I did.
You did. Well, you certainly did. You then, 1980s, shortly after you had come to San Francisco State, you were one of the first people to actually go.
In 1980, yeah. And because I knew who these people were and had written to them, they had just come out of the Cultural Revolution, and it was they were struggling to create a new society. And there were a couple of Australians and maybe a British citizen who were there in Chinese, but no Americans. No Americans went into China. We were not going into China. And I wrote to a few people I knew, and I got an invitation by Xiao Jun. Xiao Hong was no longer alive, by Xiao Jun to come to China. So in 1980, I couldn't hardly believe myself. I got on a plane, went into China, took a while to get through all of the formalities, and I went into Beijing. And while I was in Beijing, I talked to the people there, and I enjoyed being in Beijing, kind of. It was gray and dirty and all. This was 1980. And I said, how about going up northeast where all these writers were, Harbin and that area? They said, impossible, it's not open, 没有开放. I said, well, 我要不去的话，谁去? If you're not going to let me in there, who are you ever going to let in there? Because I've done all this work on these people. I won them over. They said, you can go there, spend a day or two. And I said, great. So we flew in a little Russian airplane, kind of hop up over we're going to fly over the Great Wall. And I said, I hope we do over the Great Wall, not through the Great Wall. And I got to Harbin. I got to all the provinces up in the northeast, and I got to Harbin, and I was just knocked out when I saw the words Harbin on a stick. I said, I'm here. While I was here, 趟子不够的，我这个是吞香了. I wanted to go into Hulan, where this woman was born. They said no one has ever gone into Hulan. We've never seen foreigners up there. I said, yeah, but, and they said okay. And so I went into Hulan, and I saw the place where Xiao Hong was born. And
you went into her former school, right?
This was the school. Yeah, this was the Longwang Miao, the dragon temple, a Dragon King temple, where she went to school as a child in Hulan in the 1920s, late teens and 20s, and it's still in existence. It still has school children in there. I took that picture in 1980 or 81, and they introduced me as this, and the poor kids, they didn't know what to do with me. And so 1980, and then I went out and I said, I'll probably never be back. The next year was the 70th anniversary of Xiao Hong's birth, and they were having a big deal. So they sent me an invitation to come back. That time I really saw things. I spent time in Harbin, spent time in Hulan, talked to people, met all the writers.
Wait, we have this?
Well, that's me. They got me really oiled, if you know what I mean. And they said, now you're going to write some clear. I said, I don't know how. I said, well, you'll do it. So that's the only time I've ever tried writing with a brush.
And then of course we have
and
this.
This is Xiao Jun and this is Shu Qun. These are the writers who were writing in the 1930s, who were working with Lu Xun, who was the dean of all literature. And I was able to meet, interview, and have dinner with a lot of people. Every one of them. It was the most exciting academic time or scholarly time or literary time.
And then you got them to sign.
And then before I left in 1981, a friend of mine who is the fellow beside me writing, he published a book of essays written about Xiaohong in memory of Xiaohong. And he had all of these writers. And I said, gee, I know all of these writers. I know who they are. And so I took this book around, took me a couple of days, to every single writer whose work was in there and asked them if they would sign this book. And they all said yes. Only one problem. Two of them were rivals for Xiaohong's affection. And so I was told, if you get Duanmu Hongliang to sign before Xiao Jun, he'll never sign. So I went and got Xiao Jun to sign, and Duanmu Hongliang said, sure, I'll sign. And so I got them all in there, and I sent the only copy I have here to San Francisco State, so he has that someplace.
It's in my office, and it'll be part of every modern Chinese literature graduate seminar from now on. I promise.
I'm happy about that.
And here, of course, is that translation of yours that eventually
So anyway, I guess I didn't quite finish. Well, I did finish with the Xiaohong. When I took that first book out, I remember Arthur Whaley, whose name may have means something to some of you. Arthur Whaley, the great translator of Japanese and Chinese back in the 19th century, British. He said one time something on the order, there comes a time in a translator's life when you spot a book that after you have read it, you can't sleep at night. You can't function until you put it into your own language. That was mine. And so I've done it 2 or 3 times. I keep improving it. You're not supposed to do that with the translation. It comes out once, it's out. And I keep waiting for another publisher to be interested. And they say, let me revise it first. And so I keep making it better. Maybe one day I'll do the definitive, best ever translation of Hulan Hedran. But Xiaohong died at the age of 30. It's a very young age to have died at. And I translated everything she ever wrote, from fiction. The first one was back in the 70s. The last one was about 3 years ago. It was a collection of her odds and ends. So I can, if you like,
I think we would all love to
give them a sense of what Xiaohong was like through her own writing. Very short piece, if you don't mind. I'm going to do it both in Chinese and English, so that, and I'm studying Spanish. I wish I could do it in Spanish, but I can't. It's an autobiographical piece. The light is up. Here's what she wrote, very short. 父亲打了我的时候，我就在祖父房子里。一直面向着窗子来，从黄昏到深夜，窗外的白雪好像白棉花一样飘着，而暖壶上水壶的盖子，这像样奏乐的乐器似的震动着。祖父是时时把他多纹的手放在我的肩膀上。然后放在我的头上，我的耳边就响着这么一个声音了：快快长吧，长大就好了。20岁那年，我就逃出了父亲的家庭，直到现在还是过着流浪的生活。长大是长大了，而没有好。可是从祖父那里知道了人生，除掉了冰冷的憎恶而外，还有暖和憧憬，暖和和爱护，所以我就一直追着暖和和爱的方向，怀着永久的憧憬追求着。So that's what she wrote about herself. This is maybe a couple of years before she died. In English, and it is my translation, so forgive me for that. Whenever Father beat me, I went to Granddad's room and stared out the window from dusk till late into the night. The snow beyond the window floated there like cotton, while the lid of the water jug on the heater vibrated, like the accompaniment of a musical instrument. Granddad often placed his wrinkled hands on my shoulders and then on my head, and my ears rang with the sounds of, "Hurry and grow up. It'll be fine when you've grown up." So the year I reached 20, the age of 20, I fled from the home of my father. And ever since, I've lived the life of a drifter. I've grown up all right, but things are not fine. But I learned from Granddad that besides coldness and hatred, life also includes warmth and love. And so in my heart, there is a perpetual longing and quest to find this warmth and love. That's not her fiction, but that's herself, and that's what Xiaohong was kind of like. So
Thank you.
we can move on.
Thank you. Howard, while you were a professor here, so many really famous Chinese writers passed through San Francisco State. What was that like? And that it must have tremendously enriched the literature classes you were teaching.
Yes, it was. I'm so lucky to be in San Francisco because all of the Chinese writers who finally got permission to leave came out without any money. And so when they came to us, we all took care of them, and they came first to San Francisco. And so I was able to host a lot of them, including very, very famous people like Shen Songwen, who people thought would get the Nobel Prize, and then he died before it could happen. And others of lesser renown. And they all came, and they all spoke, and they all stayed at my house. And it was wonderful because then I was able to take them into the class. And these were graduate classes for the most part. And they were able to relate to these students, and the students would ask questions, or they would just talk about. Some of them were so shy they couldn't talk, and others just couldn't stop like me. And they were great for the class. It was like you have now boosted the class into a whole new level. These are the real people who wrote the stuff you're reading. And it was quite exciting. And that happened for quite a long time. Several years, and San Francisco State was always the place, and Professor K.Y. Hsu was always the one who did all of the hosting, all of the preparation, his people. He was in his element there, and I think, well, there were two of them, Feng Jicai and Zhang Jianliang, two of who came and wanted to do things that I said, I can't take you to do, and a couple of them wanted to go to a bar. I said, I can take you to a bar, but the other places I can't go. And
we skipped over Cao Yu.
And there's Cao Yu, the great playwright, and there's somebody else behind him. And there were also some people from Taiwan, some writers from Taiwan, whom I knew much better and much longer because I had started in Taiwan and I had met many of them. And the ones I was drawn to, a few of them. Some of my favorites were the people who were writing not only the most popular writing in Taiwan, but popular in China. When the Chinese were not writing much, they were just trying to figure their way out. The writing of Taiwanese authors, both in the Xueyuan Pai, the sort of orthodox grad school type, and they call them Xiangtu, the writers the indigenous writers, the Taiwanese were writing about country life. They loved it in China. And so these people they didn't get much royalties, but they did get an awful lot of fan letters, I think, from the Chinese for what they wrote.
So you mentioned the Taiwanese writers. I thought you were going to transition into Huang Chunming.
I can. Huang Chunming and I have known each other since, I don't know when, since my graduate days, I think. He's one of the best writers and the best people and the smartest guy and the wildest person you've ever met. He took me on his motorcycle all up in the mountains, and he kept throwing spirit money out. And I said, "Is that for us or for somebody else?" But he was the most significant and influential writer of Xiangtu Wenxue, so-called Xiangtu Wenxue, with nativist writing about the Taiwanese countryside, about the Taiwanese farmers and the peasants and the workers, and he did that for years and years and years, and I translated most of his fiction, quite a bit of it, and he came to America, and he loved it. He bought a used car, never got a driver's license, never insured, and then took off and drove around America, and then left the car one day on a road and said, "I'm ready to go home now." But he was here, and what really kind of squared the circle, what it brought it all around home was thanks to Professor Green. Actually, he wanted to have a special program now that Huang Chunming had just been labeled a Guobao.
So this is, Howard is talking about 2014, and I don't know if anybody in the audience remembered that event. That was the last time we invited Howard to campus, and we wanted to have,
And so Huang Chunming was to come from Taiwan, and I was to be there with Sylvia. We were there to interview him in person. Unfortunately, he was just diagnosed with a bad disease and couldn't make it. So, always prepared, Professor Green managed to get a Skype set up. And so we had it virtually. Huang Chunming was talking from Taiwan, and we were asking questions, and the audience was there. And it was a lovely moment, and I really thank him for including me and including including Huang Chunming.
No, it was a wonderful event, and it just shows you San Francisco State was way ahead of the times. We did a Zoom event 10 years before everybody else did them. So, and you were part of it.
That was before I had any idea what a Zoom was.
So,
and now that I know, I don't like them, but it's another story.
So Howard, one thing that is so remarkable about your translation work is really, just the breadth of writers that you have translated. And there are so many that we could pick out. I do want to, because you've mentioned writers from Taiwan that I wanted to mention, and that is, the work Crystal Boys by Bai Xianyong, and this is one of the first modern Asian gay novels, and you translated this in the 1980s, right? And I wanted to ask you if you could talk a little bit about that, your encounter with the author, and what drew you to the work back then, and maybe also the impact of the book in Taiwan and Asia, and maybe even in America.
Happy to. Bai Xianyong is Kenneth Bai was the name he went by when he was teaching in Santa Barbara. I didn't know him. I hadn't known him from Taiwan. I knew most of the nativist writers. I didn't know a lot of the writers who were from the so-called Shui Empire. And I don't recall now how I was asked by somebody if I was interested in translating this novel. And so I read it and I said, of course I am. This is terrific. Bai Xianyong was a very interesting man. His father was Chiang Kai-shek's leading general, top general. And so, as a gay man, you can imagine how his father would have liked that. So he did not come out until after his father died, and then wrote this book. And this is a terrific novel. And so we met, and I was going to translate it, and I said, Xianyong, there's a lot of stuff here I don't quite understand. There are some of the terms and whatever I don't understand. He said, well, let's find out. So we went around San Francisco, bars and wherever it was, locating gay men who were willing to talk, and talking to them and say, this is the Chinese term. And they would say, well, I think this is, how about fairy queen? And I said, oh, is that good? He said, okay, we'll use that. And so we got this thing finished. Really proud of it. It was a really good novel. It was a very daring novel. It was so popular in Taiwan. And so it was about to be published, and I said, who's publishing it? He said, Gay Sunshine Press. I said, I haven't heard of that. But he was up on Potrero Hill someplace. So I went to talk to the publisher, Winston Leyland. And I walked in the door, and he said, welcome, welcome. And I looked around. I was surrounded by gay porn. It was everywhere. It was just absolutely everywhere. And I was looking down, walking in. And he was such a gracious host. And I subsequently even recommended another book by a colleague in Japanese gay fiction for him to publish. And so it was published. Ladies and gentlemen, that book flew off the shelves in gay bookstores. It was absolutely a bestseller in America, probably outdid Taiwan. the gay community in cities and other places in America loved the book. It was beautifully reviewed. And he and I became quite close friends. The situation has changed now because everything is wide open. And I sometimes feel sorry for all of the translators who are now working with gay literature because they couldn't possibly have had as much fun as he and I had with this novel.
And it's a fabulous novel for anybody out there who hasn't read it.
Crystal Boys is the
Crystal
name
Boys.
of the novel. It's a dated novel. It's old, but old stuff is good too.
Yeah. Now, Howard, of all the many writers you've translated, the one that you're probably best known for is, of course, Mo Yan, who was awarded a Nobel Prize in 2012. And here's a photo of you in Stockholm, right? Mm-hmm. And you know, actually, your translation of Red Sorghum, I think, was the one book that got me interested in modern Chinese literature. I read that very early on. How and when did you discover Mo Yan, and what made you want to translate him?
There are a lot of things that I'm proud of in my career, and a lot of things I regret. But one of the things I'm really proud of is I did some discoveries. I discovered Xiaohong before anyone in China knew who Xiaohong was. I got this book, and they didn't know who she was, and people even in her hometown weren't sure. She's now a major figure. All of the women writers and some of the others, the men, those other writers, still see her as being a model. Very still read in China. I don't know how many years. She died in 1942, so that's an awful long time ago. And then I discovered for the West, I discovered Huang Chunming. He was known in Taiwan, but no one anywhere else in the Western world knew who he was. And I translated him, and he became quite popular. Mo Yan was a very interesting case. He was a member of the PLA. He was a soldier, uneducated, didn't go to college, graduated, not even graduated from high school, all self-taught. And he had published one book that it caught on in China, Hong Gao Liang, or Hong Gao Liang Jia Zu. And I had somehow known about that and heard about it. I may have gotten it at a Type A bookstore, perhaps. And I said, this is great. This is really something that no one has ever seen before. And so I managed to write a letter to him through some sources and said, my name is so-and-so, I'm living in America. I'd like to translate your novel into English. And he wrote back immediately, said, yes, thank you, please, thank you. And so I started. And before I finished, Before I finished, I had another book came out called Tian Tan Suan Tai Zhi Ge. I think I had these two mixed up. The first one was Tian Tan Suan Tai Zhi Ge, and I liked it. And then Hong Gao Liang came. And I said, I have to translate it. And he said, yes, please. So I translated it. It really went over well in America. It was reviewed in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, in all of the major everyone loved it, thought it was a great novel. And he started on his way. Since after that, I translated a total of 11 of his novels.
And for those of you who don't know, they're very long novels.
They're very long novels.
They're
all different. And they are all terrific. And so when he was announced as the Nobel Prize winner of the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2012, China, of course, was delighted. They loved that because their earlier Nobel Prize winner, Gao Xingjian, now is a French citizen, and they don't like him so much. So they don't really count him as the other Nobel Prize winner in China. So now you had Mo Yan. And his novels have such great depth and color. He is a man of long sentences, beautiful descriptions, lots of parenthetical expressions that you would kind of insert in there. It perfectly fit my preference in writing. I like Dickens. I can't read him now so much, but I like Dickens. I like Cervantes. I like these great storytellers, and he was one of them. And so we worked very well together. Whenever I had a question, I wrote him a message, and he immediately responded with an answer, sometimes with a drawing. And he was a defender. We met in China. We met in America. we established a nice relationship. And then in 2012, he got the prize, and there we were in Stockholm having a great time. We were invited by the Swedish committee to come and participate, and we did. And the story kind of ends there, I'm afraid. He's now probably 70, and since 2012, he hasn't really written much. And what he's written hasn't been very much the sort of thing that he should have been writing all along and did for years. So I don't suspect there's going to be anything more coming from Moyen, and I'm very sad about that. We don't communicate now, I guess, because he's become very famous and very rich, which is good. I've become neither, and it's too bad. But of all the writers I have worked on, he is one of the 2 or 3 that I cherish as part of my translation career. I've written about him too, but that doesn't count so much as the translation.
And I think you brought also a little extract from Moyen, right, that you wanted to share with us?
I can. If you want to get a sense of how unusual this writer was, this is an excerpt from a novel he wrote, a strange novel, a lovely novel, and the last chapter is written without punctuation, the way Chinese is always written, of course. There's no punctuation. You knew where the sentence ended, and you know when the next one started. This is one paragraph from that novel, and I'll read as much of it until you decide you yell stop, and I will stop. She saw emerald teardrops spill out of the boy's eyes and licked them off with her tongue. They tasted like strong liquor. A low-grade liquor is a woman whose hair is brittle and yellow, whose black eyes are crossed, whose head is squeezed flat, whose teeth are big and yellow, whose freckled face is covered with a thick layer of cheap powder, yet she still smiles coquettishly and flirtatiously at men. Why do you want to drink this kind of liquor? You should drink fine liquor, like a young Russian girl whose skin is smooth and silky, overflowing with the natural flavor of wildflowers and grass. Moyen, sir, how are you feeling today? Are you feeling dead yet? No, the pink serving girl, little son, has a fine layer of peach fuzz on her upper lip. When I touch her, she mysteriously looks out the door and waves her hand pregnant with me without meaning it, but a subtle smile on her face. Say, you're wonderful. I wish we'd met before. You are married. In exchange for a smile, my lips brush her smooth forehead, which feels like a gourd. It reeks. What a drunken cat, what a drunken dog, what a lush, waving her hands to fan the air beneath her nose feels. And it doesn't stop there. And it was one of the great challenges of my life to do that and somehow make it as easy or hard to read as the Chinese. And I couldn't do it with periods or commas or anything. I wound up doing it with capital letters. I would capitalize the first word of what probably is a new sentence and give you a chance to take a breath. There was 4 pages of that. I have never asked anyone else how they liked that because I was afraid they wouldn't. And certainly never asked how they liked the translation, but it was a lot of fun. Another one that, I'm going to give you one more that he did. He wrote a novel about an executioner, and it's very gory and it's very, very hard reading. But it's 4 characters, and all 4 characters use a slightly different tone in Chinese. You have the executioner, you have a young woman, you have the official, you have this person, you have that person. And they're all different. And I said, I have to make them different. I spent a lot of time trying to tone the utterances of the executioner against the man he was killing, against the woman, against the official. I don't know how successful I was because I didn't want to turn it into something camp, something kitschy. I wanted to make it still reasonable like it was for a Chinese reader. I think it worked okay. I had never heard anything contrary. But that's the sort of challenge that Moyen put me through almost on every novel.
So that novel is the Sandalwood Punishment, right?
Sandalwood Death.
If anybody, the Sandalwood Death, right? If anybody wants to find out.
It's a good novel.
Howard, yesterday you told our graduates, unfortunately, I didn't stay during the workshop because I didn't want to intrude. I just got the end bit of it. And I heard you talk to our graduate students and telling them that if they want to be successful translators, the one thing they really have to do is read. Read as much literature in their own language as possible. And I guess what you meant was that for a translator, it's important to, maybe find a voice that might resonate with a work they are trying to translate. And earlier you were talking a little bit about that. You said that Dickens is somebody who... Yeah. For some of the writers you've mentioned, Xiao Hong, Huang Chunming, Mo Yan, what are some of the voices that you sort of drew on in the English canon?
I'll just back up just a moment. One of the things that a new young translator figures that I need to know my Chinese so well. I need to keep working on my Chinese. My Chinese has to get better. I have to understand every single word. And if they ever ask me, am I on the right track, I will say no. Keep it up, but start reading English, because you need to be able to express yourself in your own language. And if you don't read a lot of literature in different kinds of literatures, even translations, I think you may find that your translations perhaps are flatter than you would like, even though they're accurate. And fidelity to a translation does not mean the words are all translated exactly as they are in the other language. It's faithful to the tone, to the overall feeling of their work. And they don't listen to me, but I think one of the things I have done over the last 20 years is read. I spend most of my non-gardening, non-bicycle riding, time reading, trying to get a sense of how other people write literature. There are a number of voices. Certainly Huang Chunming was easier because the sort of gritty language of Steinbeck, for example, back in those days, maybe he was a Nobel Prize winner too, maybe not the greatest, but he was a good writer, and he captured the tone of Cannery Row, or not the William James or Henry James or whatever the James Bells is. None of those people who were very elegant and their words were very precise and pristine, but people who threw out words, throw them out there, make it sound like people really talked. And that's what Huang Chunming did. And so I read a lot of that, and I liked a lot of that. And I found myself getting away from the more elegant writing, simply because I'm not an elegant person, and I don't like reading that so much. With Mo Yan, the great storytellers of the world, Cervantes is one, Dickens is another. Those who tell a story big, and he tells a story big. It's believable, but it's not real, but it's believable. People may not talk like that, but they should. And that's the kind of writing that Mo Yan had, and that's the kind of writing some of my favorite writers have. My favorite writers these days are a different group altogether. I'm doing a lot more other things, but and then I have not translated many women writers for the simple reason that there weren't that many women writers in those early days. But I have translated Wang Anyi, for example. And Wang Anyi is a very, very careful writer, beautiful writer. She writes, there isn't a wrong word, there isn't a word out of place in her stuff. And also, but she captures the emotion of girls and young women, which is harder for me to relate to. And then Xiao Hong, of course. Beyond that, I have translated only a few women writers, and I've been asking women translators to do that, and they say, we're busy doing something else. I said, okay. And so a lot of the women who wrote very nicely in China and in Taiwan are not available in the West to the degree they should be. So if there are translators out there, you don't have to be a woman, but if you're willing to take on some good work, there are some pretty good books out there. They may be old, but they're good.
Howard, I want to return one more time to where it all started, and that very special relationship of yours and Kai Yu-Xu, the founder of the Chinese program. You told me about a poem by the famous Tang Dynasty poet Li Bai that played a role in that relationship between you and Kai Yu-Xu. And I wonder whether you you can talk a little bit about that.
Happy to. I'm trying to find something. I wrote something about Professor Xu that...
Actually, while you look for that, we have one more image of him in the classroom.
I wrote this about Professor Xu, that when I was a student here, during my stay at San Francisco State, the campus exploded with student protests and disputes involving the Black Student Union, the weathermen, and all of that. It was a rough time. It was tough. The university president retired or quit or was fired and was replaced, Reagan replaced him with a very conservative linguist by the name of Hayakawa, Sam Hayakawa. And he cracked the whip on the students and on the faculty and on all of that. He even called out the San Francisco tax squad, the police. You would call them riot squad or something. They had to come on campus because it was a very, very volatile moment. They arrived on campus on foot and on horseback. As they began breaking up groups of protesters, Professor Xu showed up, planted himself between a crowd of students and a line of police on horses. His presence in front of the vulnerable students not only kept them safe, but helped signal an all-around avoidance of violence. He looked very tall that day. So when I was in his class, one of the things we were told to do, asked to do, told to do, was commit some poems to memory, some Chinese poems. And so we did. We committed a lot of them, you know. We knew that, oh, that was easy. And several other the poems that everyone knew how to recite. And then choose one of your own. So I did choose one. I chose one by Li Bai, or we called it Li Po, Song You Ren. And so I did commit it to memory, recited it in class. And then years went by, I came back to the campus. It must have been the first time we met. I'm not altogether clear, but one of the first times he met me, welcomed me back on campus, said, "Oh, you memorized a poem while we were in my class, didn't you?" I said, yeah, I did. He said, "Do you still know it?" I said, "Yep." Let's hear it. Well, 青山横北国，白瑞绕东城。此地为别，故本万里征。浮云游子意，落人故人情。挥手自兹去，萧萧斑马鸣。Yeah, good, really good. I said, "Thank you." 2 days later, or 3 days later, I looked on my desk. There was a piece of paper. It was 宣纸. Do you know 宣纸, that paper that they use for writing calligraphy? I opened it up, and there were the first 5 characters that he had calligraphed for me. Whew. So I went to Taiwan a couple of years later, and I had it put in scroll form. It has hung proudly in 5 homes I've lived in since then and then on, and in Indiana and in Colorado and Boulder and in Lafayette. It's always there. It's always there. I figured it was time for it to come home. It's a little worn. This is it, and I am going to let you do it so I don't fall down.
Okay, let's do a better job than we did in my office
Go ahead,
earlier.
take it up. It's a lovely piece, and he was a great calligrapher. Hao Wen, Bei Shi, Jie Yu, Qing Shan Bei Guo, and his chops. This poem also accompanied a very sad day. When I was teaching at UCLA during that year, we got the tragic news that Professor Xu had died in the storm that swept Northern California. I was grief-stricken, came back, and at the memorial, one of the memorials, I recited that. I almost got to it. But I managed. And so I think this thing belongs here, not on my home anymore. So anyway, here it is. That's it.
You know, I had said we had talked about this event and how we wanted it to, unroll, and we knew that we wanted to end with the poem, and of course I kept saying, well, it's a little bit tough. We don't want to end on a sad note, but of course it's also not a sad note because it is the idea of homecomings and coming full circle, and so many things that you said about encouraging a new generation of becoming translators and following in your steps and going abroad. I think it's incredibly encouraging, and that Kaiushu is part of all that, and that we're all in the room together tonight. I think that's
not only is that, I've had a couple of influences. He was the first and the most important, and I went off to Liu Ji in Indiana, he too. And I did all these things. Folks, I memorized most of I memorized all of that. And I memorized I memorized those. I memorized some other things. I memorized a story by Zhu Ziqing. Okay, I did that. I've pretty much forgotten all of those. I don't care about those so much anymore. This one I won't forget, ever. And I gave a talk once to the Modern Language Association about memory, and this was the key issue for me. Kaiushu not only got me published, talked to me, I was part of some of his work, he was a terrific teacher, he was a terrific mentor, he was a terrific calligrapher, he was a terrific painter, he was a lot of things, but he was I'm just sorry that more of you couldn't have known him. You had a great father, Roland, and I'm glad that this is here.
Well, thank you,
As you get older, you start getting more emotional. That's one of the things that happens. You forget to be kind of tough and gritty and real. You just learn how to appreciate the pretty things in life, and this is one of them for me.
Well, thank you, Howard. And I promise we're going to take very, very good care of this calligraphy.
I'm sure you will.
And Howard also agreed to open up now the room to some more questions, if there are questions in the audience. I think we have a microphone coming. Wow, I think right there, 1, 2, 3, 4th row, that was the first hand up.
Could I interject this one?
Yes, of course.
There are a lot of people here I knew in the past. If you come up and we talk, please don't say, "Do you remember me?" I'm afraid neither one of us will like the answer to that question. But when you tell me who you are, I will remember.
That's also why we left those name stickers up there. So if you don't have a name sticker, put one on. Okay.
You choose.
Yeah.
Hi, Professor Howard and Professor Green. It's a pleasure to hear your story today, and thank you for sharing and for your legacy. My question is, from when you started translating until now, what are challenges that you faced early on, and how have you gotten better at tackling them as you've translated over the years?
Well, you didn't start easy, did you? The challenges, well, there are so many. The challenges are choosing the right work, figuring out how to translate it. Let me tell you, for example, that when you get a book to translate, you read it and kind of get a feel for it and all. Maybe not. I've translated at least 2 books that I hadn't read. I wanted to experience what it was like to read the novel as I was translating the novel. So choosing the right book is always important. And you have to determine what I want to translate for. What is your goal? Is your goal to get something published? Then there are one set of challenges. If the goal is to make yourself feel gratified for having accomplished something, that's another. The idea of translation is to somehow make the experience of reading a work in one language replicated more or less, in another language. It is not to make sure all of the words were translated. And I get letters from people in China particularly, and they say, but you mistranslated this word. And I want to say, no, I didn't. I just did something else with it. And so you need to figure out what you want to do, what your choice is in terms of whatever language you're doing. And then ask yourself, am I good enough to do this? Because this is a very, very serious responsibility. You are responsible to the author and to the reader at the same time. No other field that I know of has that sort of thing. You have to satisfy the reader and you have to satisfy the author. You can't do it. It's not possible, but you do your best. Probably not a very good answer, but it's all I can come up with now. Sorry.
Maybe, can we, right there.
Hi, Professor. Thank you so much for your sharing. I also found Hu Lan He Zhuan to be the most beautiful novels that I have ever read. And Xiaohong is also, of course, my favorite author. And you said Xiaohong was the only one that you have translated, but didn't have the chance to meet. So my question would be, would you still think that there is a personal connection between you and Xiaohong? And when you are translating her or reading her, would you imagine being in imaginary dialogues with her? Would you ever wonder what she might have thought about her works translated in English had she had the chance to read them? Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, she died when I was just a child. She was 30 and I was a kid. And did I wish I could have met her? Sure. Would it have made a much difference? I'm not sure. I did meet the others and I translated theirs and it didn't make a lot of difference. But did I know her? I wrote one of her novels. I actually wrote one of Xiaohong's novels. Do you know what that means? I wrote it. She didn't write it, I did. How did I do that? Well, she had envisioned a trilogy, three novels. She got the first two written and she died. And so I decided that I would translate those first two. And I did. I didn't publish them, I just translated them. I said, this novel isn't finished. It has to be finished. And I said, who should finish this novel? How about me? And so I wrote a third novel using as much as I could possibly get of knowing her. What she wrote, what she might have thought, what she would have done. It's not exact, but I wrote it. It was published as a 3-volume, as a translation in something else. I'm very pleased with it. The people in China thought that it was good, just my part wasn't long enough. I think that's a compliment. And so yeah, I knew Xiaohong somehow, but then I have spent 40 years working with her on paper. And I interviewed Dingling, I interviewed Xiaojun, I interviewed Shuqing, I interviewed Duan Menghui, I interviewed all of these people, including some people who weren't writers who knew her. They weren't always very helpful because, you know, they lied a lot, and we all do that. But it was revealing, and so yes. And that's the only person I've ever felt that I needed to do that for. No of the other writers, I didn't care. I didn't care about their personal lives much. I met some of them and didn't meet some. I liked some of them, didn't like some. Some of them treated me very well, some of them treated me very shabbily, but we still got the job done. We still got a book out there, and I guess that's what counts. Thank you. Stop that.
Roland, I think, has a question.
Howard?
Yes.
Just want to pay the compliment back. I hadn't expected such kind words, and it moved me. And in return, to say that in our home, my father spoke of you very fondly and spoke of Chinese programs, San Francisco State, Dean McDermott, these were family names in my home. And just to share that for those who are students in the room, that your professors hold you in their heart. They think of you. They hope you move on while they remember you. I do have one question for your profession. Do you ever have contact with other translators who work on these original Chinese manuscripts in their languages? Do you ever trade notes or confer on how you're doing those translations in these other languages?
Yes and no. The yes is, I know, I'll just stick with Nguyen for the moment because he's the most widely translated. I know the Swedish translator. I've met the French translators. I did meet the Japanese translator in Stockholm. There are others. And we didn't talk much about this. We were too busy having a really good time in Stockholm as the King of Sweden walked around. And Nguyen was very excited to be there, and we were very excited to be there with him. So for the most part, I don't deal with them. I can reveal one thing, that a lot of the translations into many of the languages, including German and French, are undertaken from my English translation. And that does not make me happy. For two reasons. First of all, they sometimes just get it wrong. But why don't you do it yourself? Get the Chinese. It's more important. There are a lot of third-party translations out there, and they tend not to be what you want it to be. I had one friend in, I'll give you a quick anecdote. A publisher called me one time and he said, I would like you to translate this novel, publisher in America. And I said, well, oh, it's already been translated. He said, I know that. I know it's been translated. I read it in German and it's beautiful. And I've seen the English translation, it's not very good. I want you to do it again. And I said, I can't. He said, are you sure? And I said, well, let me check with the original translator, Gladys Young in Beijing. So I wrote to her and she said, oh, Howard, please do that. My British English is so stiff and bad. You must do it. I said, okay, I'll do it. And so I did a sample, gave him a sample. He said, ooh, is that it? And I said, that's it. He said, the German is so much better. It's beautiful. So I wrote to a friend of mine, Ruth Keen in Berlin, and I said, what's going on here? She said, oh, him. He's notorious. He rewrites everything. So he had taken this novel and rewritten it and made it very nice, won a prize, but had nothing to do with the original. I mean, not nothing to do, but it was a total him over her. And so I worked with the publisher, and we did a better version, and it came out just fine. And I said, those kinds of things should not be done, but they are. And so I don't deal with other translators very much. Sometimes young translators will come to me and I'll say, here, they say, how did you do this? And I say, do you want me to go over the last 40 years with you? How much time do you have? And so, no, I don't do that very often. And I doubt that many of the other translators in any language are that friendly with other translators, particularly those who translate the same novel. And there are a lot of them who translate, a lot of novels like Madame Flaubert is retranslated every 5 years, or Cervantes, Don Quixote, everyone translates Don Quixote. Do you think those people talk to each other? No, they steal each other's words and then put them into their own framework. And that's what we do as translators. We are different people. So thanks for that question, though.
Any more questions? Yeah, right there.
Looks like you have a booming voice. You could just blast it out.
Well, I have not so much a question as more perhaps a concluding expression of admiration. I can't imagine having had a better experience on a Saturday afternoon than this, and I thank you, Professor Green, for inviting me via email. Your story your life story and all the sort of, you know, very, very honest kind of randomness and serendipity and everything was just completely pleasurable to listen to. And I think I just want to congratulate you on living such a meaningful and a meaningful and joyful and also serious life. I find you unbelievably inspiring, and thank you very much.
What can I say? Get that man's name. Thank you. That's very kind. I think it's a bit grand for me. I'm a public school kid. I went public school start to finish. That's what I do. And that doesn't mean not doing that is better or worse. It's just that was me. And I don't. It certainly colored the way I was. My father died way too young. He never knew what I did. He knew that I was taking Chinese, and he thought that might be okay. My mother never understood what I did, but she loved it. I gave her copies of all the books that I did, and I saw her. I did as good job as I could taking care of her at a distance. And yeah, I don't know. It was the only life I could have had anyway. Let's face it, I couldn't have had anything better. My dad was a hard worker, a good guy. He actually was very smart. He wasn't well read. No one is well read in those days, but he knew stuff, and he was very proud of me he thought that I'd stay in the Navy. He really thought I was going to become an admiral someday, and that was the farthest thing from my mind. So anyway, yeah, I'm very grateful to hear that. I'm embarrassed. I don't think I deserve that, but I'll accept it anyway. And I'm really happy to be talking to people. I'd like to hear other people's stories as well. Other people's stories are at least as interesting as mine, if not more so. And I guess that's what makes, if they were all the same, boy, we'd be in trouble. We would be the automatons that will eventually take over. And so anyway, thank you so much.
Okay. Are you okay for a couple more questions?
Yeah. I'm seated, so it's okay.
Maybe right here with the, and then after that, I saw one more up there.
I have a question about, like, I guess more reality things, like a living. Like, are you able to make a living as a translator, or is it just your side job, or? Because I'm interested, but like I don't really know yet. I still have a lot to learn.
I see. Okay, that's a good question. I rent these clothes. I can't afford. I can't afford to buy them. Can you make a living as a translator? Some have. Some certainly have. But you have to be translating from German or French or Spanish, because the publishers aren't going to publish that much Korean, Japanese, Chinese. They start. There aren't that many books sold when they do that. And so it's tough. Sometimes you get grants. Sometimes you get help from one thing or another. Arthur Whaley was independently wealthy. He didn't need anything. And there have been others like that who have had all the money they needed, so they were, I forget what they called, but they just translated, and they loved what they did. I'm glad I wasn't like that. I'm glad that I had kind of a gritty upbringing. It helped a lot. I think it maybe faced life a little more directly than I might otherwise not have. Most of the translators in Chinese are academics. They translate while they get a salary at a university, which means they can't do very much. They have to teach. They have to do administrative things. They have to do scholarship. When they get their summer off, they want to go to the beach. They don't want to go and start translating literature. And so it's really hard to do it full time. I was lucky in a number of ways, several ways. I had Dean Nancy McDermott in my corner, because getting tenure and getting promoted without doing just scholarship was not what San Francisco State was all about. And I was happy that that's the case, because I would rather translate than write a book. Although I've done that too, I still get more enjoyment from the translation. And so I also had time. Let me say it this way. I also had entree at the very beginning. I was there when it started. 1989 was the year that everything changed, the Berlin Wall and Tiananmen and all of that changed. But even before that, no one was writing. And then this person started writing. So let me see what you got there. And I'd read it and I'd say, oh, I could translate this. And then I would. And I got paid. I got paid maybe $5,000 for a year's work translating a novel. I'm doing better now, by the way, in case you're interested. The answer is no, you cannot make a living translating literature in a minor so-called language in terms as the West sees it. No, you can't. You can do translating of other things. You can be an interpreter. You can make a very good living as a court interpreter, for example, but no, it's hard. You have to love it, and you have to be willing to sacrifice that aspect to some degree to do it. If you're willing to do it, and I don't think necessarily you should, but if you're willing to do it, there weren't a lot of people when I was translating Chinese literature. You may or may not know it, but one of the novels by Moyen that I translated was reviewed in the New Yorker, a 4-page review in the New Yorker magazine. My goodness, you've hit the jackpot, right? Well, and the publisher called me and he said, it's coming, he's faxed, and it's coming, And he said, and the author of the article is John Updike. I don't know if you know John Updike, one of the great intellectual novelists of America. He didn't much like the novels. And I didn't expect that he would, because they're just not his kind of novels, a Moyen and a Souton. And at one point he said, it appears that Goldblatt has a monopoly on translation of Chinese literature. Well, that was not true, but it was close. I didn't have any competition. No one was doing it. No one. And so I was sort of filling in for, why didn't you translate? Oh, no time, I'll do it. And it's not like that now. There are lots of young people translating, lots of young writers and some of the older writers, and that's just wonderful. It should be more translators, because people would say, Howard, I like the work you do, but all your translations kind of read the same. They all sound the same. I said, it's because I only talk in one way. This is the way I talk. I try to change it. I modulate it. I move different words, different choices. And I finally realized that the way for my language to be different is to follow the author. So we have just translated a novel by a Taiwanese writer who writes sentences that are so long that you get lost. And yet, we kept them long. So an American or English reader is going to get lost. That's the way it should be. And my voice sort of kind of becomes his in the way I've chosen to render his work. But ultimately, and so when they say, and I see a fellow translator I know very well, Andrea back there, and when I see someone reviewing one of my translations, say the author's language is so lovely, and I want to say, it's me, it's my language, I wrote that. But it's okay, as long as they like the book, it's okay. It's a mistake for them to say the language is beautiful because of the author. The language is beautiful because, as a translator, her, me, anyone, managed to replicate in some way what you wrote. And the novel is beautiful, and in Chinese it could be beautiful, but in English it belongs to somebody else. And that's a tough pill for authors to swallow. They don't like that. They want every good word about their work to be directed to them. I understand that. I don't agree with it, but I understand that. And I live with it. So does she. We all live with that. As translators, we are the underdogs, always. It's as it should be.
Good. I think there was one question in the back, the gentleman in the back.
Appreciate. Thank you, Professor, for your time. So for me, I'm a former student, and I graduated 2012. And there was a story for another time, but there was a straw that broke my camel's back. So I'm not doing any more work. But I just, from the start of the talk, I think Professor Green shared that you still translate every morning. I just wanted to know what drives you to do that. Obviously, not for monetary terms, you just mentioned, but what drives you?
I am now independently wealthy. We're in a house, kind of a house in a very small town. There are fewer people living in our town that are on the approach to the Bay Bridge this morning. And so it's a very casual, it's a very easy life. We like it that way. I get up every morning. If it's a sunny day, go out for a bike ride, good long ride, get sweaty, come back, have breakfast, and then sit down and work for 3 or 4 hours. If I couldn't do that, now I'm already starting to wonder how I'm going to get through the next 2 days because I'm not working. And then I take my afternoons off and read and do things like that. And it becomes part of your life. I'm not a workaholic. I'm not an obsessive. I work a lot. I work hard. I work fast. But and some of it's good and some of it isn't. But it's meaningful to me just to keep at it. Unfortunately, some of these young guys are getting all the good stuff now. So I'm a little more selective in choosing a few things that I like to translate. And fortunate, I'm going to go back to this. Fortunate to have been given a sense of what good living is by your father and by Professor Liuji at Indiana University. Those two people, they didn't just teach me literature, they did, but they taught me things by the way they lived their lives and by the way they dealt with students. The way they dealt with students, I said, I have to learn how to do that. And most of you will probably say, he didn't learn it well, but, and so, when you get to a point where you have retired, I taught at several universities. And the last university, I was an adjunct teacher. I was accompanying another professor. And I did some teaching in the PhD program and did a little of this and a little of that, worked for the provost, did committee work. And I said, I don't want this anymore. I want to go home. And she said, let's go home. So we went home. And she gave it up, and I gave it up, and we came back to Colorado, and then we just translate. I sometimes do it alone, sometimes do it together. And I have a pension. I have I am old enough for Social Security, in case any of you were wondering. And so we do fine. We do okay. Some of these people do give us financial support, and there are grants. The Taiwan Foundation will pay so much money to do a translation. It's not enough, but we have other things. And so I'm not, if you have exactly the same circumstances as I have, yes, you can make a living translating. Does that help? Probably not.
Well, Howard, don't stop. Don't stop with the translation. Keep it coming.
I won't stop.
I know we have prepared a little reception on the 5th floor of the Humanities Building, 578. You're all welcome. And I know that Howard agreed if anybody wants a selfie with Howard, any former students, you're up for that.
Go, John.
But please join me once more in thanking Howard for
Thank you.
your presence.
Kind of goofy, wasn't it?
So there's, if anybody would like to join the reception, 5th floor, there's stairs. You sort of go out of the door where you came in, and then you turn right, and then you see the stairs. And there's also elevators going up if you're scared of the 5 stories. Oh, very good. Alec is going to give us directions.